Chapter 1, Promises in the Jungle. The rain fell in sheets over Boggett, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of mud. It was 1963, and the city was alive with the progress, new buildings rising, construction cranes stretching toward the sky, and the promise of a brighter future for those who dared to dream. But beneath the veneer of prosperity, something darker was taking root. In the heart of the city, a man named Carlos Mendoza stood on the corner of Carrera 7, his hands tucked into the pockets of his raincoat. He watched as a group of workers unloaded stacks of freshly printed brochures from a truck, their glossy covers promising paradise, luxury apartments in the Andean foothills, spacious homes with mountain views, a piece of Colombia's future today. The words were seductive, the images too perfect to resist. Mendoza wasn't just any buyer, he was a detective, and he had been tracking these brochures for months. They were the calling cards of a shadowy network of developers who had been selling dream streams that didn't exist. The scam was simple, elegant, and devastating. The developers would advertise plots of land or unfinished buildings in the most desirable parts of the city, often in areas where construction had barely begun or, in some cases, hadn't started at all. They'd take deposits from eager buyers, sometimes entire life savings, and then vanish. The land, never theirs to sell. The buildings, never built. And the buyers left with nothing but empty pockets and broken promises. Mendoza had seen the pattern before. A widow in Chapinero, her savings gone after pouring down, a deposit on a penthouse that existed only on paper. A young couple, their wedding money spent on a house that would never be. The stories were the same, the victims always the same ordinary people who had been sold. A future that didn't exist. But this time, the scale was different. The developers weren't just small-time con artists. They were connected. Politicians, bankers, even judges, some of the most powerful men in Boggett were involved. And they had a new target. The jungle, beyond the city limits, where the concrete gave way to dense, untamed wilderness, lay vast stretches of landland that was cheap, unregulated, and ripe for exploitation. The developers had a plan. They would sell plots in these remote areas, promising infrastructure, roads, electricity, everything. A modern community needed. And when the buyers arrived, they would find nothing but trees and the echoes of their own betrayal. Mendoza knew he was walking into a storm. The developers had eyes everywhere. Informants bribed officials, even fellow officers who looked the other way for the right price. But he also knew something else. The scam was unraveling. A whistle blew in the distance, and the workers scattered, their truck roaring to life as it sped away. Mendoza pulled out a crumpled brochure from his pocket, the ink still fresh. On the back, a single phone number. He dialed it from a payphone down the street, the line ringing once, twice. Thus, a voice, smooth as silk, answered, "You've reached the office of Inversiones Futuro. How may we help you?" Mendoza hesitated. He could hear the of a typewriter in the background, the murmur of voices, a real office, a real business, or so it seemed. "I'm interested in the jungle properties," he said, keeping his voice steady. "The ones in the brochure." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "The jungle? Yes, we have many opportunities there. But you must act quickly. The best plots are going fast." Mendoza clenched his fist. "How fast?" "Faster than you think." The line went dead. That night, Mendoza sat in his dimly lit apartment, the city lights flickering through the rain-streaked window. He spread out the documents he had gathered at bank records, property deeds, names. The pieces were there. The developers were using shell companies, fake identities, and bribes to keep the scheme alive. But there was one thing they couldn't hide: the money, and money always left a trail. The next morning, he met with his only ally in the police force, a grizzled detective named Luis Rojas. The two men sat in a cafe, the steam from their coffee curling between them. "These guys are smart," Rojas said, sliding a file across the table. "They've got people in the registry office. They've got people in the banks. If we go after them now, they'll know we're coming." Mendoza flipped through the file. Photographs of the developer smiling, well-dressed men in suits, their arms around politicians, their hands shaking deals that would ruin lives. "Then we don't go after them directly." Rojas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Mendoza leaned in. "We follow the money, every deposit, every transfer, every bribe. We find where it's going, and then we cut it off." It was a dangerous plan. If the developers caught wind of the investigation, they would disappear along with the evidence. But if they succeeded, they could bring down an entire network of corruption. The hum was on. Over the next few weeks, Mendoza and Rojas worked in secret, tracing the flow of funds through a labyrinth of fake companies and offshore accounts. They discovered that the developers weren't just selling land, they were laundering money for drug cartels, using the property scam as a front for their illegal operations. And then, one evening, they got a break. A tip from an informant led them to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, they found stacks of forged deeds, ledgers filled with names of victims, and something even more damning, a list of the developers' next targets. The jungle. The developers were planning their biggest scam yet. They had purchased thousands of acres of land in the remote regions of the Amazon, advertising it as prime real estate for the next wave of Colombian settlers. But the land was worthless and inhabitable, infested with disease, and surrounded by armed militias who would kill anyone who tried to claim it. Mendoza stared at the documents, his stomach twisting. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was murder. He turned to Rojas. "We have to stop them before they sell another plot." Rojas nodded grimly. "And we have to do it before they realize we're onto them." The next morning, they set their plan in motion. With the help of a handful of trusted officers, they raided the developers' offices, seizing records and arresting key figures in the operation. But as they expected, the masterminds had already fled. The trail led south, into the jungle. Mendoza stood at the edge of the city, the humid air thick with the scent of earth and decay. Somewhere out there, the developers were waiting, and they were armed. He tightened his grip on his revolver. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a manhunt, and the jungle was their battleground. To be continued.